I welcome you all in the next video tutorial of communication skill. So students, in this video tutorial, we are going to see the barriers to the communication. What are the different barriers that affect our communication? So the barriers to the communication, they can be classified into following types. As you can see in your screens, the sender oriented barriers, the receiver oriented barriers, and the channel oriented barriers. As you know, the communication process involves, as you can see this is the communication process. The first is sender, then message channel through various channel, then the receiver, and of course the feedback is there. So the first barrier is the sender oriented barriers. That is the lack of planning, okay, clarity about the purpose of communication, improper voice of word, and the wrong selection or the choice of the channel. Second one is the receiver. Suppose this is the communication barrier on my point of view. Suppose you are listening to me and I am not able to deliver the proper lecture to you people. Then it is on my behalf. It is the sender oriented barrier. It is my mistake. It is on my behalf. And the receiver oriented, now on your behalf, the barrier arises. If you are not interested in listening to me, if you people are not interested in communication skill, then you people are not able to understand the concept. Okay, lack of interest and poor listening. Then the channel oriented barriers, then the noise, wrong selection of the medium. Suppose I have used the wrong media, that becomes a barrier, and you are not able to hear me properly, that becomes the channel oriented barrier. So there are different types of barrier, like physical or environmental, physiological, then the language barriers, personal, emotional, socio-psychological, cross-cultural, and the psychological barriers. If we talk about number one is the physical barrier, or you can say the environmental barrier. As the name indicates, it includes the environment. Okay, so number one is the environmental related barrier. Suppose large working area, or if you have a closed office door like arrangement. If you have external noise, suppose you are in your classroom and your classroom is nearby the road and there is a outside disturbances all over going on in the roadside, so that becomes your barrier. Okay, the physical noise, outside disturbances, then written noise, that is bad handwriting or the typing mistake, then the visual noise. Okay, you are not able, suppose see this image, this mic is very close. So you have a proper type of sitting arrangement. Suppose if I are talking about the classroom, अगर हम classroom की बात करें तो classroom में भी if we do not have proper sitting arrangement, then it might cause some environmental barrier. Suppose आपकी क्लास लगी हो, एक फैन चल रहा है, फैन में बहुत ज्यादा आवाज आ रही है और आपका ध्यान आपके टीचर पे ना जाके फैन पे है, that becomes your physical barrier, environmental barrier. Suppose आप क्लास में बैठे और बाहर आपका ध्यान बाहर है, आप बाहर सड़क की तरफ देख रहे हैं, that becomes your barrier also. Next is the time and the distance. Again, time differences between the two, they might become the barrier. Of course, the surroundings are there, adverse condition. Suppose in this place, in place of road, suppose you are coming for the GPAT classes and the temperature out here is -5. So you are not able to focus on your concept, on your topic, on your studies, because there is a barrier, environmental barrier, weather conditions are not suitable for you. Next one is the physiological barrier. The physiological barriers are related to personal health and fitness issue. Suppose you have a poor eyesight and you are not able to hear properly, and you might have some other disease condition like uncontrolled body movement or epilepsy, etc., that leads to the communication barrier and become the physiological barrier. Then comes the language barriers. Yes, misinterpretation of the word, pronunciation is not accurate, that becomes your barrier to the communication. Next is the semantic or the language barrier. As you can see, no clarity in the speech, misinterpretation of the word or different languages. Okay, next is the personal barrier. The personal barriers have to do with the age, education, and the interest and the needs, and it may differ from person to person. Suppose you are admitted in B Form and your aim is to do, you are dreaming and you are aiming for somewhere else. Suppose you are aiming for civil services, so you don't have full interest in your studies. That become your personal barrier, क्योंकि आपका ध्यान कहीं और है, तो शायद आप अपना 100% ना दे पाओ, and that leads to the communication barrier. नेक्स्ट इज इमोशनल. सपोज इमोशनल कंडीशन, अगर किसी इंसान की इमोशनल कंडीशन अच्छी नहीं है, वो सपोज इस दौर से गुजर रहा है, इसमें लाइफ में उसके फैमिली मेंबर्स में कुछ ना कुछ डिस्टर्बेंसेस है, या कुछ मतभेद चल रहा है परिवार वालों से, देन इट बिकम्स द इमोशनल बैरियर. ओके. नेक्स्ट, सोशो साइकोलॉजिकल बैरियर. The psychological barriers can be described as the cause of the distorted communication because of the human psychology problems. Then cross-cultural barriers are there. So suppose if you are going somewhere and some French people ask you about some place. Suppose आप कहीं जा रहे हैं घूमने और कोई फॉरेनर आ गया और आपसे पूछने लग गया फ्रेंच लैंग्वेज में, क्या कर पाओगे? यस, कम्युनिकेशन बैरियर. आप उसको समझा नहीं पाओगे प्रॉपर्ली, क्योंकि फ्रेंच आपको आती और इंग्लिश वो नहीं समझ रहा है. सपोज देन इट बिकम अ बैरियर. तो दैट इज योर बिकम योर कल्चरल बैरियर ऑल्सो. और सपोज हम अगर फॉरेनर की बात ना भी करें, अगर हम इंडिया की ही बात करें, सपोज आप तमिलनाडु चले गए और वहां पे किसी को हिंदी या इंग्लिश नहीं आ रहा है, और आपको तमिल, तेलुगु या फिर उनकी जो अपनी एक लोकल लैंग्वेज है सपोज वो नहीं आ रही, देन बिकम अ बैरियर. ओके. सो आई होप दिस इज क्लियर टू यू. सो लेट्स रिकॉल अ बिट. तो यस, what are physiological barrier? Different the hearing, expression, etc. Psychological means psychology related to the brain, that is emotional disturbances, neurosis, lack of intelligence, language or comprehension difficulties. Environmental barrier, yes, noise, invisibility, congestion, etc. And the cultural barrier, of course, the language differences is there, cultural differences is there between the foreigner and the national, etc. So ultimately you have to remember this table and you have to draw this in the examination. So there are different type of barriers to the communication. Physical, environmental barriers, so they are caused by the climatic condition, noise, space, place, time, choice of the medium. I hope this is clear to you. That is physical barrier. Next is the, if you talk about the barrier caused by the wrong choice of the medium. So this is, suppose if teacher has selected a medium that is not suitable to you, that becomes a barrier. Then semantic barriers caused by the different connotative meanings. Then cultural barrier caused by diversity in the cultures. Physiological barriers caused by the attitudinal barriers caused by the moods, attitudes and the relationships. So see again, physiological barriers are related to the limitations of human body and human mind, like memory, attention and perception. So these includes physiological barriers. Suppose it may result from the individual personal discomfort caused by some ill health, poor eyesight or hearing difficulties. So it becomes your physiological barriers. Then psychological barriers, to misconception or the misperception about the particular concept. Okay, unhappy emotions, you are not in the proper state of mind, that becomes your psychological barrier. Yes, the most common is the physical or the environmental barrier. Yes, you can see here, crowded, noisy environment, people taking music playing, no privacy. Then cultural barrier are there, we have different cultural values. Then personal barriers are there, suppose you are not interested, lack of confidence. Then social barriers are there, suppose you are not interested in talking to other gender, or you're not interested to talking to you some economically backward area, or you can say the weaker section of the society, you are not interested to talking to that people, then becomes your social barrier. Semantic barriers, so due to improper slang it becomes sometimes barrier. Linguistic barrier, of course, the language, organizational barrier is also there. So this is all about different type of barriers. So I hope this will give you a brief idea, and in the last I acknowledge all the sources that I have used to prepare this video. So thank you for your patience and listening.